Welcome back to question number 2. Now, everyone should have a separate piece of paper at this point because we're going to be doing some work and it's going to require a lot of space. I'm also going to give you some notes, so if you want to have a highlighter and things like that, I'm going to go over a couple of important things for this question. Number 2, we're going to preview the question, we're going to read it, and then we'll start talking about it. Match the equation on the left to the line description on the right. So in this question, what we're doing is we're matching. Match the equations on the left with the line descriptions on the right. Okay, look at our choices for A, B, C, and D. For A, we have the equation y equals 1. B, y equals negative 1/3 x plus 5. C, negative x plus 3y equals 12. And D, x minus 2y equals negative 8. All of these are equations for lines. The reason we know that is because we have both an x and a y in the equation. So we know that this is an equation for a line. Also, the x is to the first power. If it had x squared or something like that, then it wouldn't be a linear equation. It would be some other type of graph. Now, let's see what we're trying to match each of these lines up with. What are these descriptors on the right? First choice, we're looking at a line perpendicular to x equals 5. Okay, so they're talking about things that are perpendicular. 2, a line parallel to the equation y equals 1/3 x plus 2. Okay, so now we're looking at lines parallel. 3, a line parallel to negative 4x plus 8y equals 9. Again, parallel. And lastly, a line perpendicular to 9x minus 3y equals 18. Okay, perpendicular. So what we're looking at is we're looking at parallel and perpendicular lines. And we're trying to match up what would be parallel or perpendicular to the equations. So there's something that we have to understand before we get started. I covered it in our little overview before we started these problems. But if you recall, for lines to be parallel, they need to have the same slope. So the slope of one line should equal the slope of the other line. For lines to be perpendicular, that means they form a right angle at their intersection, and the slopes have to be opposite reciprocals. So what does that mean? That means if I have a positive slope for one line, the other one should have a negative slope, and the fraction should be flipped. It should be the reciprocal. So I'm going to write it as negative 1 over m, because as you recall, any number can be put over 1. So if I flip that fraction, it's 1 over m. Okay, so that's what it takes to be parallel and perpendicular. There are some special cases, however, and I'm going to start talking about them by talking about part A. Y equals 1. Well, there's no slope there at all. I don't see a slope. There's no m value. Remember, m is the coefficient to your x value. So for example, if I had an equation y equals 2 over 5x minus 3, my slope would be the number right in front of the x. So it would be that 2/5. Looking at that equation, I don't have one. So I need to think about, well, what the heck is a y equals 1 line? Okay, let's talk. These are the notes that you should be taking. So I'm going to talk to you about something called Hoy-Vux. Hoy-Vux is an acronym that helps you understand what y equals and x equals lines are, how they look, and what their slopes are. So if I have Hoy, that stands for horizontal, the H stands for horizontal lines, have a 0 slope, and they're y equals lines. So for example, this horizontal line could be y equals 1. On a graph, what that would look like is, let me go ahead and zoom in on that. Y equals 1 would look like a horizontal line that passes through the y-axis at 1. So I always start by going to, give me 1 second here. I always start by going to the y-axis, putting a point where y is 1, where y is equal to 1, and then making a horizontal line that goes through it. This would be the equation y equals 1 for that line. Horizontal line, slope of 0, y equals equation. Okay, so that's what the HOI part stands for. Now for the VUX. VUX means if you have a vertical line, the slope is undefined, and it's an x equals line. So this equation could potentially be x equals, let's say, 2. So let's take a look at our graph and see what that would look like. So if it's an x equals 2 line, I'm going to go to the x-axis where it's equal to 2. So right here, that's 2 on the x-axis. And if it's x equals, then I'm going to draw a vertical line so that I can cross through the x-axis. So this would be x equals 2. Now, one thing you should note is y equals lines and x equals lines are always perpendicular. Always, always, you're going to get a right angle when you have a y equals line and an x equals line. So let's go back and let's just put one more note in here. And we're going to write down y equals lines and x equals lines are always perpendicular. And we know that's the symbol for perpendicular. Okay, so now that we have that note down, let's go back to the question. We have, for A, we have y equals 1. HOI, horizontal, y equals 1. So we have a line that looks like this. And we need to match up with something that's either going to be parallel or perpendicular to that line. Let's take a look at choice 1. So it says a line perpendicular to x equals 5. Well, we just talked about how any x equals line is vertical because it's a VUX line. So what would be perpendicular to a vertical line? Well, a horizontal line. Which of these choices is a horizontal line? We were just talking about it. Choice A. So here we go. A matches up with number 1. Let's go on to some of the other choices. Okay, I'm going to take a look at B. I notice that for B, it's already in slope-intercept form, which makes it very easy for you to tell what the slope is of that line. The slope of this line is negative 1/3. Negative 1/3, I'm going to write it down so I can keep track of all of my slopes, because that's really what determines if things are parallel or perpendicular. So I have the slope of negative 1/3. Let's see if it fits any of the situations here. So number 2, it says a line parallel to y equals 1/3 x plus 2. Okay, so they're looking for a line parallel to this equation, y equals 1/3 x. Let's take a look at the slope. So we have 1/3 as the slope of this line. If I want something parallel, I'm looking for a slope that has the same exact fraction, 1/3. Can't be negative, has to be exactly 1/3. Well, for choice B, it says negative 1/3. That's not the same as a positive 1/3. So B and 2 do not match up. Let's keep going. Take a look at C. I have this equation, but it is not in the form that we like to look at. Remember, all lines should always be in y equals mx plus b format, because then it's very easy to tell what your slope is and what your y-intercept is. If it's not in this format, it's going to be very difficult for you to tell if things are parallel or perpendicular, neither, intersecting, coinciding, whatever the vocabulary is. You need to have your lines in y equals form. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the time now to put choice C into y equals form. I'm going to give myself some space. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to rewrite the equation. Negative x plus 3y equals 12. In order to put it into y equals form, you need to rearrange the whole formula. You basically just need to solve for y. You're going to do PEMDAS in reverse. Basically, you're going to get rid of whatever's being added or subtracted to the y side, and then get rid of whatever it's being multiplied or divided by. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start with the negative x. We're going to get rid of that so that we can start getting y all by itself. So to get rid of the negative x, we're going to add x to both sides. This cancels. Now bring down the 3y equals. On the right-hand side, we have a positive x and a 12. You can't add those together. They're not like terms. So we're just going to put x plus 12. Now, we're closer to getting y by itself, but we're not done. So the next step is we have to break up this relationship, this marriage, between the 3 and the y, which is the multiplication. So to break it up, we're going to divide out the 3 for every single term in this equation. Divide out the 3, divide out the 3, divide out the 3. The 3's cancel, so we have y equals. Here, for the x over 3, we're not going to keep it as x over 3. Instead, we're just going to remember there's an invisible 1 coefficient to the x. And what we're really doing is we're dividing that coefficient by 3. So it's going to be 1/3 x plus 12 divided by 3, 4. This is my linear equation rewritten. Remember, these two things are identical. The original equation we have and the one that's in y equals mx plus b format. They're the same exact line. It's just rewritten in a different way. So now, take a look at this equation. You can tell right away that your slope is 1/3. So I'm going to write down for c that my slope is 1/3. Now, if you remember, we were just looking at the choice for number 2 that says you're looking for a line parallel to y equals 1/3 x plus 2. And we said we're looking for a slope of 1/3. Now that we put c in y equals form, we can tell that, oh, c matches up with number 2. Those two lines will be parallel because they both have a slope of 1/3. Okay, we have choice D to go through as well. So let's go ahead and clear off some space for choice D. Okay, now for D, x minus 2y equals -8, you should notice again, this is not in y equals form. And I never want to look at the line unless it's in y equals form. So let's go ahead and get started. X minus 2y equals -8. We're going to convert this. Remember, our goal is to get y by itself. Let's start getting rid of whatever is being added or subtracted to that left side. So we're going to get rid of the x by subtracting x from both sides. Now we have -2y equals, on the right side, -8 minus x. Well, we can't combine them. They're not like terms. So we're going to put them next to each other. -x minus 8. And now we are almost getting y by itself. But we have to get rid of that -2. So just like we did before, we're going to break up this marriage between the -2 and the y. And we're going to divide every term in the equation by -2 to get y by itself. It cancels on the left. So we're left with y equals. Now, to the right of the equal sign, we have an invisible -1 in front of the x. Notice we're dividing -1 by -2. The double negative will cancel, so you're going to get a positive number. 1 divided by 2 is just 1/2. Keep the x along for the ride. And then we have -8 divided by -2. Again, double negative becomes a positive. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now, we really only care about the slope when we're talking about things being parallel or perpendicular. So let's go ahead and hone in on the slope here, which is a positive 1/2. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. M equals 1/2. And let's see if it matches up to anything on the right. Okay, so we've already used up choice 1 and choice 2. Now we have choices 3 and 4. So for 3, it's asking for a line parallel to negative 4x plus 8y equals 9. Well, I don't know what the slope is of that line, so I can't determine if it's parallel to any one of the things we already have. So first step, before I can figure out what matches up with number 3, is to put it in y equals form. So let's go ahead and give myself some space, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing and put this equation in y equals form. Okay, so this is number 3. Negative 4x plus 8y equals 9. Again, our goal is to get that y by itself. Start by getting rid of the negative 4x. So to get rid of negative 4x, we're going to add 4x to both sides. This cancels. We have 8y equals 4x and 9 can't combine, so you put them next to each other. And now we're almost done. Now we just have to get rid of the 8. So we're going to divide all the terms by 8. 8s will cancel. Now we have y equals, just take a look at the numbers, 4 over 8x plus 9 over 8. Now, take a look at that 4 over 8. Usually we would be done, but 4 over 8 can be simplified. And whenever you're looking at slope, it always needs to be in simplest form. That's the only way that you can tell if two things are in fact parallel or perpendicular. So we're going to go ahead and simplify 4 over 8. So 4 over 8, the top and the bottom have the greatest common factor as 4. So if you divide the top by 4 and the bottom by 4, you're going to get 1 over 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So really, if I rewrite this equation, my answer here, or rather my line in y equals form, is y equals 1/2 x plus 9 over 8. So again, my slope is the coefficient to the x value. So my slope here is 1/2. So the question is really asking me, find something parallel to this line that has a slope of 1/2. Well, parallel means same slope, same slope. So I need to look at my choices A, B, C, or D and see if any of them have a slope of 1/2, the same as choice 3. And I do. I just figured out for D that the slope is 1/2 when I put it into y equals form. So what does that mean? That means D matches up with 3. That has to also mean that B matches up with number 4. But let's go ahead and do the work to make sure. Remember that B has a slope of negative 1/3, so we need to see if it makes sense for what number 4 is describing. Okay, let me go ahead and clear off some space. Okay, number 4. A line perpendicular to 9x minus 3y equals 18. Uh-oh, again, not in y equals form. Let's get it there. So number 4, 9x minus 3y equals 18. Feel free to pause the video and try it yourself. You don't have to always follow along with me. All right, so I'm trying to get the y by itself. So I'm going to subtract 9x. This will cancel. Now we have negative 3y equals negative 9x plus 18 because they can't combine. And now I'm almost done. I have to get rid of that negative 3. So every term gets divided by negative 3. So now I have y equals negative 9 divided by negative 3. The negatives cancel. So now we have 9 divided by 3, which does divide evenly, and you get 3x. And now on the right here, a positive and a negative makes it a negative. When the signs are different, if you're multiplying or dividing, it's negative. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So this equation, 9x minus 3y equals 18, can be rewritten as y equals 3x minus 6. The slope is 3. So if I have a slope of 3, and I want something perpendicular, I need the opposite sign. So I'm looking for something that's negative. And I also need my fraction to be flipped. Now 3 isn't a fraction, but you could always put any number over 1. So if I flip 3 over 1, I get 1 over 3. So basically, a perpendicular line has to have a slope of negative 1/3 to be perpendicular to number 4. Let me look if I have a slope of negative 1/3. I do. B has a slope of negative 1/3. So that makes sense that they're perpendicular. They have opposite signs and they're reciprocals of each other. So this was a long question, but I went through it very carefully. Just remember, parallel, same slope. Perpendicular, opposite reciprocals. And it has to be in y equals form before you try and decide if it's parallel or perpendicular. And the last little thing to note before we kind of conclude this question, whenever you have a y equals line, it's horizontal. Vertical lines are x equals lines. And whenever you have a y equals and an x equals, they're always going to be perpendicular. Okay, I'll see you at the next question.